Our Orange Shirt Day assembly usually looks something like this. We're gathered in an auditorium, listening to an honorary guest speaker tell us firsthand about their residential school experience. But COVID-19 has transformed our day-to-day lives before our very eyes, but that won't stop us. A group of social justice students and graduates from a few Lester B. Pearson School Board high schools work together to reinvent and create what we hope will be a meaningful, virtual Orange Shirt Day assembly. We hope you enjoy the presentation. In order to show our deep respect for the land on which our Orange Shirt Day event takes place today, we would like to acknowledge that Lester B. Pearson School Board is located on the unceded territory of the Ganya-Gehaga people. Lester B. Pearson honors, recognizes, and respects the Ganya-Gehaga people as the traditional stewards of the lands and waters on which we meet today, and recognizes that this land has long served as a site of meeting and exchange among nations. We also acknowledge the harms and mistakes of the past and commit to informing ourselves about this truth in order to move forward in partnership with Indigenous communities in a spirit of reconciliation and collaboration.
Hi, my name is Amanda Savoy. I'm a graduate from Lester B. Pearson School Board High School. When I was in high school, I never understood why they were teaching us history. For me, all of these events happened in the past, so let's just leave them there. Well, it's taken me about 6 years to realize how important history really is. It's also taken me all this time to realize that we've only gotten one side of the story. We were only told what the curriculum told the teachers to tell us. And in the reality, that wasn't history from every culture's perspective. It was one side of the story. It's important to look into all aspects of our history, the good and the bad, because it's in learning from the mistakes of our past that we can create a more inclusive, a more harmonious, and a brighter future. Orange Shirt Day exists because of a woman named Philip Webstad. When she was 6, her grandmother took her to a store to get a shirt for her first day of school. Think back to when it was your first day of school and your parents took you out to get an outfit for that first day. It's an exciting time. She picked up a beautiful orange shirt and she was very excited to wear it. When she got to that school on her first day, they took away all of her belongings, including that orange shirt. It was a residential school. The following video clips, we went into the community and we interviewed people. We asked them what they knew about the residential school system in Canada. This is what we got.
Residential school system? Like people living in dorms?
It's a residential school system that was in place in Canada. What do you know about it?
Absolutely nothing.
Absolutely nothing, eh?
My name's Tili Gasanesox. I'm a Mohawk from Ganawage, and I was also adopted during the 60s scoop. So I grew up in a non-native family, not knowing my culture, not knowing my traditions or my languages. And I am 55 years old, so when I went through the school system, elementary and high school, I didn't learn anything about the Indigenous population or my community. I think there was one page in a history book that talked a little bit about Iroquois. What I've recently learned, and this is only in the last 13 years since I started working in an Indigenous organization, the Native Women's Shelter of Montreal, what I've recently learned is that these individuals were taken, stolen from their communities, and literally dragged and kidnapped to residential schools where they had no contact with family. Their hair was cut. The Indigenous people, their hair, long hair for the men is their strength, the women is their strength. All their hair was cut off, and that ties them to their culture and their traditions. They were forbidden forbidden to speak their language. They were punished, they were abused, they were starved. Individuals died at residential school, and those that had left the residential schools afterwards were traumatized, were unable to connect back with their families. So there's a whole generation that's been affected, and it had a domino effect that as when they became parents, then it was difficult for them to connect with their own children. So everything and more like this I've learned only 13 years ago. 13 years ago, I started learning about what that was and what had happened. I had no knowledge of that prior to me starting to work at a Native organization and meeting elders and meeting women and meeting the community that taught me about it.
I don't know much, but what I will say is that what happened? I guess it's several years ago, the government systemically went into Indigenous people's homes, took the kids away from the family, separated the kids and put them into institutions where they never saw their family again.
Very, very little. I know that there was a settlement that was paid out, and that's really about all I really know.
Isn't it shocking that in 2020 there is still so much unknown about such a huge part of Canadian history? How is it even possible? Hopefully, in organizing events like this, Orange Shirt Day, we can start changing that. And it doesn't just start with us, it can start with you. I know it may seem small and insignificant when one person does something to spread awareness, but it only takes one rock in a water to make the ripples go. And if you do something, it's one more person doing something than if you did not do anything at all. We are the future. It is our duty to inform ourselves about our common history so we can make informed decisions for our community. I'd like to introduce Delta Jacobs. She is Ganyak Gehaga from Ganawage and is a very accomplished student from Lakeside High School. Will you all please welcome Delta.
Thank you, Amanda. As we can see, different people know different levels of what residential school was, but I don't think many know how truly awful the effects really were. First of all, the name is a huge misnomer. This place wasn't meant to educate Indigenous children. It was meant to strip away their identity. The education they did receive came at a cost, though. Their language, their heritage. It basically boiled down to a system which was meant to break them and to erase their Indigenous identity, and break and erase it did. The abuse that this generation of children suffered was passed down to their children, and it lives on today. It's called intergenerational trauma. These are wounds that pass down through our lineage like scars. They'll fade, but they'll never truly go away. People forget that this generation of children was our parents, our grandparents, our great-grandparents. In fact, the very last residential school closed in 1996, which was not a very long time ago. So this video we will not watch next is a testimonial from Chief Robert Joseph, a Gwiw'enuk First Nation from British Columbia, who went to residential school himself.
I was 6 years old when they took me to a residential school. I remember the day walking toward that school with my mother, and it was a silent walk, and I was so afraid. 20 or 30 little kids herded into the showers, and then your body being painted in white liquid of some kind, your hair cropped and then doused in kerosene. And that was pretty traumatizing. The school held roughly 220 people, half boys, half girls, and we were segregated. If I was caught waving at my sister, there'd be a punishment for it. And so as a result of that segregation, I never really learned any social skills that young people should be learning as they grow up. From a religious and spiritual perspective, of course, The churches lobbied hard to convert Indigenous people, Aboriginal people. They said that we were heathen and pagan. They targeted language in those things we had learned through all of millennia to know where we came from, to know who we were, as something that had to be eliminated. Before that time, I lived in a place called Guayastams. They call it Guilford Island now. We harvested from the forest all of the animals that we needed to provide us sustenance. And from the ocean in front of us as well, all of the species of whales and mink and fish. And I had a connection to the environment around us. And so after having spent years in those schools, by the time we were ready to leave, most of us were pretty broken. Many of us, including myself, descended into addictions, alcoholism, and violence, and it was pretty difficult. Those schools lasted for over 100 years. There were over 150,000 little children. And the last school that closed in Canada was in 1996 in Saskatchewan. There was a history on this land that had been absolutely ignored. Nobody knew about the residential school legacy. Nobody knew about the intent of the Indian Act, the chronic challenges now facing Aboriginals. And we're starting to accept the idea that we have this shared history for which we all are responsible for. When the Truth and Reconciliation Commission report was submitted, I was in the room when Justice Murray Sinclair, the chair of the commission, denounced Canada. He had just recited a litany of intensive harms against Aboriginal people. And when he said, "Canada, you have committed cultural genocide," there was just a silence in that room, and then all of a sudden it erupted in euphoria. We said, survivors want an apology from the Prime Minister in the House of Commons. And I was there and I heard the words, "I'm sorry," and then I couldn't see because my eyes were just flowing with tears. I was so happy that somebody had said, "I'm sorry." Canada, by the way, is the only Western country that has had a Truth and Reconciliation Commission. So we're trying to look through a new lens. We and Canadians, we as an Aboriginal, we celebrate each other, everybody cheering each other up as we move toward a more equal, prosperous future for all of us. My name is Chief Robert Joseph, and I believe that Truth and Reconciliation is Canada.
Robert was only 4 years old when he was put in residential school. When children were taken, not only did they lose their cultural identity, but they lost their right to be a kid, to have friends and learn social skills. The video that we're going to show you next is a testimonial from Lillian Elias, who is an Inuvialut residential school survivor. Here's her story.
I was 8, 9 years old. It was so just like losing my parents. Losing my loved ones. It's like I would never see them again.
Lillian Elias was one of approximately 150,000 Indigenous children across Canada forced to attend residential schools, part of the government's plan to assimilate Indigenous people into Euro-Canadian society.
And the first day that I walked in there, I didn't speak a word in English. I didn't even know how to say goodbye or hello or anything.
In all her years at school, Lillian rarely heard anyone speak Inuvialuktung.
You don't dare speak your language. And I think that's why I really fought to keep my language. They could take my pride and things like that, but not my language. I got strong.
Lillian maintained her language by translating for family members. She became an advocate and teacher. Because of her work, many Inuit youth have grown up knowing who they are and where they come from.
I always say that your culture, your language tradition. You have those three. If you know who you are, if I know who Lillian is, for the rest of my life, I'm going to be feeling good about myself.
I would now like to introduce Mrs. Smatos, who will explain the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and all of its course of action. Here's Ms. Smatos.
From what you saw today, many of the human rights of those children who attended residential schools were violated. Consequently, in Canada, a Truth and Reconciliation Commission was created to look into that government wrongdoing in order to find the truth. In this case, the outcome is cultural genocide. The TRC traveled across Canada over the course of several years. They interviewed thousands of residential school survivors, many of whom had spoken up for the very first time. You may ask, why would we risk re-traumatizing people now by having them speak up now? But every single testimonial was officially documented so that the truth was known and could never be denied, so that this would never happen again. And whereas before the TRC, not very many people knew about the residential schools in Canada, after the TRC, when the truth came out, the government both acknowledged and apologized for what had happened. The outcome of the Truth and Reconciliation is 94 calls to action. I'm just going to talk about two calls to action, 62 and 63, which state the following. We call on the federal, provincial governments and the education ministers to make age-appropriate curriculum on residential schools, treaties, and Aboriginal people's historical and contemporary contribution to Canada a mandatory education requirement for kindergarten to grade 12 students.
In honor of the children who survived residential school, and in memory of those who do not, we will light a candle. This one is in memory of children who lost their language.
I light this candle in honor of the children who lost their sacred and traditional dances and songs when they attended residential schools.
I light this candle in honor of the children who felt unsafe and unprotected while they attended residential schools.
On Orange Shirt Day, which is September 30th, we want you to wear your orange shirt to honor and remember these children that went through the residential school system. It's not just any orange shirt, it represents the childhood and innocence that was taken away from so many young kids like Robert and Lillian. Every child matters. So we would now like to end this assembly with a song and music video. It represents strength and resilience, which we as Indigenous people have inherited, even though pain and suffering are passed down to us as well. Music like this is very important to Indigenous people because we have very little representation in media as it is, but without any other notes, here is Stadium Powwow by A Tribe Called Red.